Hello again, War Thunder players. A few months ago, I made a review for the game, and it kind of blew up. Thanks for all the support and awesome discussion in the comments, except for those of you who thought you were clever for commenting, skill issue. I wish all of you guys a very pleasant kidney stone. But it's clear that most of you guys wanted more War Thunder, so I'm quitting rehab and getting back on the horse of addiction. Now, the vast majority of disagreements with my review came from members of the Homo neanderthalis species, otherwise known as CAS players. So I thought I'd go over them in this video. This should be fun. A common theme that you'll see throughout this video is that most of these people didn't actually fully watch the video or understand my argument, which makes sense considering the average CAS player's IQ. Case in point here, when I complained about SPA being harder to use than CAS, quite a few people brought up that SPA in higher tiers is good. The problem is that I clearly said I was just talking about the CAS problem in tier 4 and 5. I don't find CAS in early tiers to be too bad. Little World War era piddly biplanes are pretty slow and easy to shoot down with machine guns, and they don't have a lot of bombs. But once you start getting into tier 4 and 5, where aircraft are getting faster and jet aircraft are starting to come into play, there's a huge imbalance in favor of aircraft. So if the Panzer or whatever is clapping cheeks in high tier, well, that's good, honestly. Ground vehicles not being dominated by aircraft in their own mode? Incredibly based, if I do say so myself. Okay, before we go on, let's recap my argument for why CAS is too strong from my last video. First of all, the main problem with CAS is that it just doesn't feel fair to die to. In my experience, a lot of tanks at tier 4 and 5 have little to no ability to counter or escape from planes. A lot of tanks still just have top-mounted 7.62s or pintle-mounted MGs. Even if you have a 50 cal, I've found them still pretty inconsistent for killing planes, and with all the MGs on tanks, you only really kill planes if they fly straight at you for a while and don't dodge. And of course, tanks are pretty slow, so it's pretty hard to escape a bomb with a short fuse. Because of this, getting killed by CAS feels super cheap, especially when you add revenge bombing into the mix or giant bombs that almost require no aim to get kills. The second issue is that SPA have a much higher skill ceiling to use than CAS, are less rewarding, and are often more boring to play. Obviously, SPA can shred aircraft in the hands of a skilled player, but there's an imbalance to how easily one is to use over the other. Leading fast and evasive targets in the sky, a 3D space, is mentally and mechanically more difficult than lining up to strike slow-moving targets on the ground, which is a 2D space. In my experience with SPAA, planes usually only die when they stupidly fly straight at you, or because they didn't check if AA was around before going on a bombing run. As CAS, it's pretty easy to avoid AA fire if you aren't completely terrible. Just staying more than a kilometer away from AA makes it super hard for them to hit you. Also, half the time you spawn as a SPAA, there's nobody in the sky because the guy who killed you Minecraft no-lifed himself after running out of bombs. So you're stuck in a vehicle that is pretty useless for ground combat, relatively speaking. Obviously there are exceptions to this like the ZBU, but let's not pretend that most SPA are as effective at fighting tanks as a normal tank. Another common scenario is that you're the only SPA on your team, so you get insta-targeted by multiple enemy CAS as soon as you start shooting. The third problem is that the dominance of CAS means that to stay competitive, tank players have to grind entire other vehicle trees, both the SPAA and plane lines, that they might not even be interested in. And this is one of the factors that makes progression in ground battles glacially slow. You have to research a bunch of other types of vehicles just to have a decent lineup for your tier. Now in my review, I made two suggestions that I thought would help alleviate this. The first is to increase spawn costs for CAS, especially for loading ground pounding weapons. It's ridiculous that someone can just get 1 or 2 kills and then spawn in a P51 or something at the beginning of the round before most people even think about pulling out their SPAA. The second is to make CAS planes take off from the runway to make it harder for them to revenge bomb and make CAS less of something you can just quickly pull out to save a cap or something. Now I think these are pretty fair suggestions, but apparently some CAS players are so bad they can't even stomach these. This type of comment is literally proving my point that CAS is just seen as a quick and easy way to get a few kills for some people. Buddy, if you can't stomach taking off from the airfield in order to drop your bomb on someone who can't even fight back, you should just uninstall. In response to these criticisms, I got a few comments saying to just hide behind houses or in bushes. Okay, well, first of all, usually CAS takes you by surprise while you have your focus elsewhere trying to play the tanks game mode, and you don't have time to hide. Oh yeah, and I guess you're fucked if you're, playing the objective, cause that basically reveals your location to every plane in the sky and gives them a nice little target to aim for. Or if you're shooting other tanks, cause it's pretty easy to notice the flashes and dust kicked up by tank cannons. Not to mention that most maps are pretty open from the air and it's pretty damn easy to spot tanks. Let's be real, guys. I'm not going to say that cover is useless, obviously, but someone who's played a decent amount of CAS and ground battles should know that there are very few ways to easily hide from CAS. It's just being disingenuous to say otherwise. And the ways that you can, like hiding in passageways or in bushes, often mean you have to stop participating in the fight actually happening on the ground. What do you CAS guys think that we ground players should be doing? Scuttling off to a bush every time we get a kill on the off chance that 3 minutes later the salty loser we killed is going to us with a bomb that we barely saw coming? Not to mention that the plane audio in this game is usually fucked. Often enemy planes don't make a sound, or the sounds seem to be coming from completely random directions until they're right on top of you. Okay, let's take a break and look at a non-brain dead argument for CAS, that it helps fight campers. This one I can't really refute per se. It's objectively true that CAS can be a great tool to easily take out someone camping in a tough position. However, I want to raise 2 points in response. Firstly, not all camping is bad camping. Someone just holding a good angle isn't doing anything wrong, that's just playing smart. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, most of the tank gameplay in this game is holding cheeky angles and exposing as little of our tanks as possible, behavior that could be described as camping and can be countered without CAS. Secondly, bad camping, like abusing terrain and getting into overpowered positions that probably weren't intended to be in play, should be fixed by Gaijin editing the maps, not through overpowered planes. Now, some people disagreed with my CAS takes on the basis of realism, which is problematic to say the least. Let's look at these 2 comments. First off, you can see that they didn't watch the video because I never said that tanks should be able to fight planes like an SPA or something, and I never argued for removing CAS from ground battles. It's also pretty moronic to say that just because in real life CAS dominates tanks, ground players should be okay with being treated like RP piñatas. This is a game, it's meant to be fun, and while realism can make a game more enjoyable, it has to complement and work with the other aspects of the game. The realism argument might fly, pun intended, for games like Arma with really long games, huge maps, and lots of setup, where CAS actually has to search for you and where dropping bombs is a little harder than just lining up and pressing space at the right time. But while War Thunder might have some realistic features like its damage system, the way War Thunder ground battles are designed just aren't realistic. The matches are fast, the maps are small, there's obvious objective markers, and stuff like spotting in the death cam gives an almost exact location of where your enemies are. In fact, you could say that the presence of these things actually makes CAS unrealistically strong in this game. If CAS had to take off from the runway and fly to the battlefield, had to search for enemies on a 16 by 16 kilometer map or something, had to coordinate with players on the ground instead of being given obvious spotting markers, and didn't just know where the person who last killed them was, I imagine people wouldn't be as upset as they are now when they get killed by CAS. Now, I've shat on CAS players a lot in this video, but I do want to recognize that some of them have achieved sentience. I can have respect for someone who uses an OP weapon, but admits it should be nerfed. Here, you can have a banana and sit at the kids' table. And to be fair, it's not like I'm perfect either. In my review, I mentioned that the early game tanks are from World War I, which in retrospect was dumb as fuck because they're all interwar tanks at least. I think that I was just thinking about the American LVTA-1, which kind of looks like a land ship. I don't know why I didn't just Google that fact to check, but it probably had something to do with an all-nighter and lots of energy drinks. Either way, you guys were right to roast me about that. But despite being a dumb goober sometimes and not being a turbo virgin with 5,000 hours in this game, it's clear to me that something needs to be done about CAS. When we play multiplayer games, we should want to be able to say, damn, that guy outplayed me when somebody kills us. In tank versus tank combat, even when you get one shot, there's usually some way that you could have played better. Maybe you shouldn't have peeked that angle, or you should have pre-aimed, or you missed a weak spot. But getting killed by CAS is so annoying because it usually doesn't feel like you could have done anything to prevent it. It's not a contest of skill between the pilot and the guy on the ground. The only thing that decides the outcome is whether the pilot is too shit to get his bomb on target, which isn't too difficult if you're using large bombs. The tank player has very little agency over the engagement, and having your agency taken away from you feels like shit. Unfortunately, I don't think the CAS issue is going to be addressed anytime soon, since it's been a problem for a long time and Gaijin has absolutely no incentive to fix it. CAS being so strong incentivizes players to buy premium vehicles or premium time so that they can join in the seal clubbing too, and I'm sure that Gaijin makes a lot of money from it. Well, I think that just about covers it for my argument. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, or hated it, maybe leave a like or a comment to let me know what you thought. I literally read every single one. I've also got some more War Thunder videos coming down the pipeline, and I make game reviews, so if you're interested in any of that, maybe give my ass a slap. I mean the subscribe button.